Hello and welcome to Dear Heroic Life. We want to know where you're watching from right now. Are you relaxing at home, working, or traveling somewhere special? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to tell us what you love most about our channel. On a bright afternoon in New York City, the bustling energy of Fifth Avenue seemed to shimmer beneath the sun's rays. Tourists snapped pictures in front of grand storefronts, and locals hurried by, each with their own sense of purpose. Amid the throng of designer bags and polished shoes, an elderly woman named Helen Reeves strolled at a measured pace, her gentle demeanor in stark contrast to the city's frenzied tempo. She wore a well-maintained but modest floral dress, and though her clothes did not declare wealth, her posture spoke of quiet confidence. Helen paused outside Carter and Wilson Fine Jewelry, her eyes drifting over the gleaming displays that sparkled behind the spotless glass. It was a shop renowned for its exclusivity, a place where high-profile clients often swept in and out, dropping large sums on dazzling diamonds and refined pearls. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the heavy glass door, making her way into the cool, climate-controlled interior. The polite chime announcing her arrival seemed to welcome her into a world shaped by elegance and high price tags. Inside, the store's pristine marble floors reflected the overhead chandeliers, each crystal shimmering with an almost hypnotic brilliance. Elegant display cases lined the room, showing off all manner of precious stones. Behind one such case stood Dylan Carter, a senior salesman with razor-sharp instincts for lucrative transactions and a self-assured manner that bordered on condescension. He noticed Helen immediately. In his mind, her modest attire signaled that she was not a potential high spender. Nevertheless, Dylan mustered a polite but distant greeting. "Good afternoon, ma'am. May I help you?" His tone, although courteous, held a note of restrained judgment. Helen offered a soft smile. "I'm looking for a gift," she replied. "Something with sapphire, if you have it." Dylan raised an eyebrow, fighting the impulse to scoff. Sapphires were among the pricier gemstones, a preference typically reserved for wealthier patrons. Yet, he led Helen to a sparkling array of sapphire earrings, each pair nestled on plush velvet stands. The overhead lights hit the jewels at precise angles, amplifying their brilliance until they seemed to glow from within. Helen gazed at the earrings with a thoughtful expression. "They're exquisite," she murmured, gently reaching to pick up one. Dylan's posture stiffened. He was torn between wanting to appear helpful and a nagging suspicion that this woman would never make such a purchase. He watched her closely, longing to rescue the earring from her hand before she could smudge it or, worse, drop it. But he held his composure, forcing a practiced smile to remain on his lips. Helen remained composed. She gently placed the earring back on its display, her expression filled with genuine admiration. "They really are lovely," she said, as if oblivious to Dylan's obvious skepticism. But there was a subtle note in her voice that indicated she was not just window shopping. Dylan, however, was not ready to surrender his doubt. "These particular pieces," he began with a smooth but unmistakably patronizing air, "are quite valuable. Perhaps we have something more fitting in our other cases if you're on a particular budget." He gestured vaguely, his grin as dazzling as it was insincere. Helen tilted her head slightly, her calm brown eyes meeting his. "I appreciate your concern," she replied softly, "but I'd still like to see these, if you don't mind." Dylan blinked, uncertain how to respond. He forced another smile, mentally calculating how long it would take to steer Helen away from the expensive items. Meanwhile, beyond the store's doors, the busy street carried on as always, ignorant of the small drama unfolding inside. Helen followed Dylan to a section of the display case where the most coveted sapphire pieces were arranged. Each set of earrings appeared more radiant than the last, their deep blue hues dancing under the store's refined lighting. As Dylan unlocked the case, a sense of unease flickered in his eyes, but he concealed it behind a veneer of professional composure. He retrieved a pair of sapphire drop earrings, their teardrop gems surrounded by clusters of tiny diamonds. The price tag was steep enough to elicit gasps from most casual shoppers. "Here you are," Dylan said, laying them gently on a suede tray. Please be cautious when handling them. Helen leaned in, appreciating their delicate craftsmanship. Her fingertips brushed across the metalwork, feeling the subtle texture of the setting. Dylan watched her closely, battling the urge to snatch the jewelry away before any accident could happen. Yet he remained outwardly calm, determined to maintain the store's reputation, if not his own. Helen lifted one earring, holding it to her ear before the mirror. The blue stone caught the light, creating a brilliant gleam that complemented her warm features. The price of these items never came up in her questions, and Dylan took that as a sign of obliviousness rather than genuine capability. They truly are exquisite, Helen remarked, turning the piece slowly in her hand. I'd love to try them both on, if you don't mind. Dylan forced a polite chuckle. Of course, he replied, though his tone had chilled. But you should know these retail for over $30,000. Not everyone finds them within reach. The remark hung in the air like a cautionary bell. Helen didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled as though acknowledging some unspoken challenge. Quality is often worth the price, she answered, when it carries meaning. That response made Dylan's brow furrow. He'd witnessed countless browsers who admired high-end pieces they could never afford, and in his eyes, Helen was simply another daydreamer. He glanced at her floral dress and worn handbag. Certainly, he said, attempting to keep his condescension in check. Though for some, that's an entire year's living expenses. A person must be qualified to appreciate pieces like these. Helen paused, understanding the insinuation. She set the earring back on the tray, taking her time. Her calm demeanor contrasted with Dylan's growing impatience. I believe the value of jewelry can transcend mere cost, she said gently. Sometimes there's a story that makes it priceless. A nearby customer, drawn by the conversation, quietly drifted closer, sensing the tension. Meanwhile, Noah Jacobs lingered behind another counter, overhearing every word. He wanted to intervene but feared overstepping boundaries. Dylan had seniority, and a confrontation might only make things worse for Helen. Yet, Noah's conscience nudged him to be ready if things escalated. Dylan exhaled, his frustration becoming more apparent. Ma'am, he said through a tight-lipped smile, I'm sure you have your reasons for admiring such fine pieces, but please consider that this environment caters to a very specific clientele. If you'd like, I could direct you to our more accessible selections. Helen met his gaze without wavering. I understand, she replied. Still, I'd like to try both earrings on. The resoluteness in her voice unsettled Dylan, who had expected her to retreat. Instead, she seemed entirely comfortable under his scrutiny. Reluctantly, he obliged, handing her the second earring. Helen carefully fastened each piece, turning to face the mirror. The sapphires shimmered against her silver hair, enhancing her graceful appearance. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, as though recalling a cherished memory. Then she turned back to Dylan, a half-smile on her lips. They're lovely, she said once again. Before Dylan could respond, Helen's phone vibrated softly in her handbag. She retrieved it, glancing at the screen. A flicker of surprise and delight passed over her features, though she said nothing. Slipping the phone back, she began removing the earrings with the same care she had used when putting them on. I think I've seen all I need to see for now, she declared. At that, Dylan's annoyance spilled over. He let out a short, mirthless laugh. I suppose you have, he said, his voice tinged with mock pity. Perhaps next time you'll remember these cost more than, he gestured vaguely at her attire, than most people earn in months. It's important to understand one's limits before dreaming too big. The unkindness in his words caused a hush to settle over the nearby onlookers. Noah clenched his jaw, struggling with whether to step in. Helen, for her part, slipped the earrings onto the tray and regarded Dylan with the same gentle expression. Thank you for your assistance, she said simply, though the slight tremor in her voice hinted that his remarks had stung more than she let on. With that, Helen turned toward the exit. The store's elegant chandelier lights danced upon the polished floor, reflecting a tableau of wealth and prestige that seemed to push her toward the door. She walked slowly, each step echoing in the hushed space, the tension emanating from Dylan pulsing like a taut string. Outside, the roar of traffic and bustle awaited. But another force was quietly approaching. A motorcycle's distant rumble that would soon shatter the delicate veneer of Carter and Wilson fine jewelry and reveal that not all is as it appears. Moments after Helen Reeves stepped outside, a deep, throaty engine growl cut through the ambient noise of Fifth Avenue. Heads turned as a sleek motorcycle pulled up to the curb. The rider removed his helmet, revealing a familiar face to millions worldwide, Keanu Reeves. Unbeknownst to the onlookers, the accomplished actor had come to meet his mother, his expression both concerned and relieved as he spotted Helen standing in front of the jewelry store. Inside Carter and Wilson Fine Jewelry, Dylan Carter continued to exude self-satisfaction, unaware that his arrogance was about to catch up with him in spectacular fashion. He was recounting the event with a smug grin to Noah Jacobs, who listened with a mixture of disbelief and disapproval. "She wasted my time," Dylan complained, "and she clearly couldn't afford anything here. It's good riddance." Noah opened his mouth to respond, but he was interrupted by the soft chime that announced the store's front door opening once again. Dylan turned, expecting another casual browser. Instead, in walked Keanu Reeves, helmet in one hand and a thoughtful smile on his face. The store seemed to hold its breath, customers and staff alike frozen by the presence of someone so recognizable. Dylan's confident posture faltered for an instant, but he quickly regained his composure. This was, after all, the type of clientele the store was meant to serve. "Mr. Reeves," Dylan greeted, voice brimming with polite enthusiasm. "Welcome to Carter and Wilson Fine Jewelry. How may we assist you today?" Several bystanders, including the curious customer who had observed Dylan's earlier interaction, looked on intently. Keanu's gaze swept the displays, but it was clear he wasn't there to shop. His eyes drifted toward Noah, then landed on Dylan with a penetrating seriousness. "I'm looking for my mother," he said, his tone courteous but edged with concern. Dylan frowned in confusion. "Your mother, sir? I'm not sure I—" His words trailed off as the store door opened once more, and Helen stepped back inside. She walked over to Keanu, who greeted her with a warm embrace. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked softly, studying her face. Helen offered a reassuring nod. "I'm fine," she replied, though her eyes flicked nervously in Dylan's direction. A hush fell over the store as understanding dawned on everyone present. The elegant older woman Dylan had ridiculed moments before was, in fact, Keanu Reeves' mother. Embarrassment washed over Dylan's features, draining the color from his cheeks. He had prided himself on his ability to size up customers, but in his haste to judge Helen, he had made a catastrophic mistake. Keanu turned to face Dylan, his expression polite but unyielding. "I understand there was a conversation about whether my mother belongs in this store," he said, his voice calm yet charged with indignation. Dylan's eyes darted nervously. I didn't realize she was, related to you," he stammered, desperately trying to salvage the situation. "Had I known." "Of course." With every syllable, Dylan dug himself deeper. Keanu raised a hand to silence him. "The issue isn't about who she's related to," he said quietly. "The issue is the way you treated her. My mother deserves respect, as does anyone who walks into a place of business. You didn't give her that courtesy." Across the store, Noah watched the unfolding scene with both admiration and relief. Finally, someone was calling Dylan out on his behavior. The small group of customers near the sapphire display had gone utterly still, riveted by the drama. Dylan cast a desperate look around, hoping for support from anyone, but found only distant stares and disapproving glances. Even the store's security guard, who had politely stood aside during the earlier exchange, appeared unsettled by the confrontation. Helen placed a gentle hand on her son's arm, her voice steady. "Keanu," she said softly, "I'd prefer not to cause a commotion." He turned to her, his tone softening. "I know, Mom," he replied, "but no one should have spoken to you that way. You came here to look for something special, and you were treated as if you had no right to be here." Dylan attempted a feeble smile. I sincerely apologize," he said, his eyes darting from Helen to Keanu. It was a misunderstanding. If I had known. Again, Keanu's gaze hardened. Would you have treated her differently if she weren't my mother? He asked pointedly. That single question hung in the air, as heavy as the largest diamond in the display cases. Dylan had no answer. His silence spoke volumes, casting a stark light on his earlier actions. Helen stepped closer, lifting her chin. Everyone deserves kindness, she said quietly. That's a lesson I taught my son from a young age, and it's something we all should remember, regardless of someone's status or appearance. The finality in her words left Dylan with no avenue of defense. He merely nodded, swallowing hard as he realized the gravity of his mistake. By this point, the entire store was wrapped in the tension of the moment, each spectator learning a lesson in humility. The tension in the store hung thick as Keanu Reeves and his mother, Helen, stood before Dylan Carter. Murmurs rippled through the gathered onlookers, but nobody dared speak loudly enough to break the moment's fragile stillness. Suddenly, a door at the back of the showroom swung open, and Mr. Sterling, the store manager, emerged with a look of displeasure etched across his usually composed features. News of what had transpired had reached him quickly. Dylan, Mr. Sterling said in a measured tone, his gaze flicking between the salesman and the actor. A word, please. The invitation was more of a command, and Dylan's face paled. He nodded stiffly, attempting to maintain an air of professionalism, though he was visibly shaken. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on Helen's shoulder. She returned his glance with a small, appreciative smile. I don't want to make a bigger scene, she whispered, her eyes reflecting concern for the trouble she was causing. Keanu bent down slightly, speaking softly in her ear. You're not causing this scene, Mom. It's a consequence of how you were treated. As Dylan crossed the sales floor, heads turned to follow him. No one spoke, but the collective judgment radiated like an unspoken verdict. Noah Jacobs kept busy behind another display, though he looked up in time to catch Helen's eye. A trace of a grateful smile passed between them, acknowledging his silent empathy. Meanwhile, Mr. Sterling held the door to his office open, motioning Dylan inside. Before entering, the manager cast a swift, apologetic nod in Helen's direction. Once the door shut behind them, a hush fell again, broken only by the soft hum of the store's overhead lights. Helen noticed how a few customers who had witnessed the confrontation now regarded her with newfound respect. Some offered discreet smiles, while others murmured to one another, likely sharing their astonishment at what had just occurred. At the periphery, a woman in an expensive fur coat seemed to debate whether to approach Helen with words of apology or simply leave. Finally, she opted for a polite nod from a distance. Meanwhile, in Mr. Sterling's office, Dylan stood stiff-backed before a mahogany desk. The manager's stern gaze bore into him. I'd like you to explain, Mr. Sterling began. What exactly happened out there? Dylan shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing to craft a suitable justification. Sir, I was only trying to gauge her seriousness as a customer. That's my job, to protect our merchandise and offer appropriate guidance. Mr. Sterling's brow furrowed. Your job is to treat every customer with respect, no matter how they appear. We serve an upscale clientele, but we are not in the business of demeaning people. I've received several complaints about your attitude before, Dylan. This, however, is beyond acceptable. Dylan opened his mouth to protest but found no credible defense. He swallowed hard, realizing the precariousness of his position. Out on the sales floor, Keanu and Helen had taken a seat on a nearby bench, a simple corner designated for clients who needed a moment to consider their purchases. Helen's hand remained gently in her son's, as if taking solace in his presence. Keanu leaned in, voice subdued. We can go if you'd like. We don't need to stay here a moment longer. Helen considered his words, her expression thoughtful. I don't want to leave on such a negative note, she replied. But perhaps I've seen enough jewelry for one day. Let's just wait until I've caught my breath. As they spoke, Noah finally gathered the courage to approach. Clearing his throat softly, he offered Helen a small bottle of water. I'm sorry for what you experienced here, he said, sincerity evident in his tone. I hope you'll accept my apology on behalf of the store. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Helen gave him a gracious nod. You're kind, she said simply, taking the water. Keanu acknowledged Noah with a smile of thanks. The door to Mr. Sterling's office swung open, and Dylan stepped out, looking grim. The manager followed, exuding an air of finality. Dylan, Mr. Sterling announced, loud enough for the staff and nearby customers to hear. Please gather your things and take the rest of the day off. We'll discuss your employment here further in the morning. The pronouncement dropped like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples of surprise and satisfaction across the showroom. Dylan's shoulders slumped. Without looking at Helen or Keanu, he walked to the back of the store, where the employees kept their personal belongings. Mr. Sterling then approached Helen and Keanu, adopting a composed but contrite demeanor. Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Reeves, let me extend our deepest apologies for the way you were treated. Please believe that this does not reflect our store's values. We pride ourselves on impeccable service, and I am truly sorry that we failed you today. Keanu nodded, though his expression remained guarded. I appreciate that, he replied, but understand that it's not about who I am or what my mother could afford. It's about treating people decently. If you can guarantee that's the lesson learned, then I'm willing to let it go. Mr. Sterling inclined his head. I assure you, sir, we will address this. Carter and Wilson will do better. Helen stood, still looking a bit shaken, but relieved that the ordeal was nearing its end. Thank you, she said softly, glancing at the store manager before turning back to Keanu. Let's go, dear. I believe we have a better place to be. Though her voice remained composed, her eyes shone with unspoken gratitude for her son's intervention. In a matter of minutes, they would leave the glittering interior of Carter and Wilson Fine Jewelry behind, stepping back into the bustling world of New York City, where a simple but powerful truth awaited them. Respect is priceless. Keanu Reeves guided his mother out of Carter and Wilson Fine Jewelry, the polished glass doors closing behind them with a muted click. The late afternoon sun bathed Fifth Avenue in a warm glow, and Helen inhaled deeply, as though cleansing herself of the tension she had just endured. Traffic surged past, cars honking, pedestrians weaving in and out of the crowds, completely unaware of the emotional storm that had just passed within the store's opulent walls. Are you all right? Keanu asked quietly, concern evident in his tone. Helen nodded, still holding onto his arm. I am, she answered, smiling gently. Thank you for standing up for me. He returned her smile with a soft one of his own, kissing her forehead with the tender affection of a devoted son. Always, Mom, he said. You taught me better than to watch idly when someone I love is treated unfairly. They moved away from the busy thoroughfare, turning onto a quieter side street where a cozy cafe nestled between two tall buildings. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans and the promise of a peaceful corner drew them inside. A cheerful barista greeted them, unknowing of who they were, and simply offered a genuine smile. Helen and Keanu found a small table by the window, where sunlight filtered through the blinds to cast gentle stripes across the wooden tabletop. As they settled in, Helen's shoulders relaxed. She placed her handbag by her side, leaning back in her chair. Keanu observed her silently for a moment, recalling how she had always carried herself with grace, even in the most challenging of circumstances. I'm sorry you had to deal with that sort of disrespect, he said. If you'd told me you were going there today, I would have come sooner. Helen reached out and patted his hand reassuringly. You were there when it mattered, she replied. Besides, experiences like this are reminders of the world we live in. Not everyone sees beyond appearances, but I won't let it sour my outlook. Keanu nodded, encouraged by her optimism. He understood that his mother's calm strength was no fluke. It was born of a life that had taught her resilience. Ordering 2 cups of coffee and a slice of lemon cake, the pair settled into easy conversation about simpler topics. A new film project Keanu was considering, the small garden Helen tended at home, and the book she was in the midst of reading. Their laughter mingled with the casual buzz of the cafe, a comforting counterbalance to the earlier tension. From time to time, a passing stranger would glance their way, recognizing Keanu's face. But the mother-son duo seemed so at peace that few dared intrude. The people who did notice merely smiled in acknowledgement and continued on their way, granting them the privacy they clearly valued. Helen took a sip of coffee, savoring the warmth that spread through her chest, and then set the cup down. "You know," she began, her voice thoughtful, "I went into that store hoping to find something special, a piece of jewelry that reminded me of the night sky, perhaps something meaningful." Keanu listened intently, leaning forward. "And did you find it?" he asked gently. Helen's gaze drifted to the window, where the city's ceaseless motion played out in miniature. "In a way," she admitted, "I discovered that sometimes the greatest treasure isn't material at all. It's the support and love of those who truly care about you. You showed me that today." A warmth flushed through Keanu's chest. He placed his hand over hers on the table. "I hope you always know how much you mean to me," he said. For a moment, the clang of dishes and the soft hum of conversation seemed distant, as though they existed in a separate, serene bubble. Helen's eyes shone, and she gently squeezed his hand in response. Eventually, their coffee cups emptied, and the lemon cake was reduced to a few sweet crumbs on a plate. With renewed spirits, they decided to head home. Keanu helped his mother onto the back of his motorcycle, securing her helmet and double-checking that she felt comfortable. Anyone watching the scene might have been surprised to see an elegant older woman happily riding off through Manhattan streets on the back of a motorcycle, but for Helen, it was a thrilling reminder that life should be embraced in all its unexpected forms. The engine's growl reverberated between the tall buildings as they pulled away from the curb. Helen held onto her son's waist with absolute trust, and in that shared moment, the day's difficulties receded into the wind. For all the tension and hurt that had erupted in the jewelry store, this was where they belonged, together, forging ahead with hearts unburdened. Unbeknownst to them, inside Carter and Wilson Fine Jewelry, a few employees exchanged hushed words about what had taken place. Some felt shame for having said nothing sooner, while others felt a surge of determination to treat every customer with genuine warmth, remembering that one can never truly know the story behind a simple floral dress. By confronting injustice, Helen and Keanu had sparked a quiet revolution in at least one corner of Fifth Avenue, proof that sometimes the smallest acts of dignity can leave the largest impressions. Life often tests our resolve in the most unexpected ways, reminding us that our character shines brightest when challenged. Helen Reeves entered Carter and Wilson Fine Jewelry with a simple wish to find something special, unaware she would face judgment based on appearance. Her quiet dignity confronted a salesman's prejudice, proving that respect should never be confined to social standing or outward impressions. When Keanu Reeves arrived, he underscored an enduring lesson. True worth lies not in the glitter of gemstones, but in the kindness and empathy we extend to one another. By standing up for his mother, Keanu demonstrated that moral courage resonates more powerfully than any precious stone. This story serves as a reminder that every interaction holds the potential to teach us about compassion, humility, and humanity's capacity for growth. Through one act of empathy, we can transform perspectives and encourage others to see beyond the surface. The people who observed that moment, whether in the store or those hearing it elsewhere, walked away with a renewed sense that status, wealth, or fame do not define our value. Instead, it is our treatment of others that truly reveals who we are. May we all remember to show kindness and respect, whether we stand behind a jewelry counter or walk into a store in everyday attire. In doing so, we uphold the belief that each person's story deserves attention and care. Because, at the end of the day, it isn't about who someone might be related to or how much money they possess. It's about how we choose to honor the shared dignity that unites us all. And that, more than any glittering sapphire, is what truly shines. Let this reminder guide our choices daily, ensuring that our compassion is as genuine and enduring as any treasure we could hold.